Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 3 of my live stream, Gosling Media Live. I'm going to be doing this for 12 weeks, and this is the third week of that 12. And today we're going to be talking about hiring a designer, which is something that I'm very passionate about, as I've spent basically my whole career doing this or being the designer being hired. And then since starting Gosling Media, convincing people to use Gosling Media maybe sometimes instead of hiring a designer directly. So before we jump into that, I just want to give you a quick update on the show schedule. So you can go to goslingmedia.com/live and that's not the right screen, is it? Bear with me, folks. I am sharing the wrong screen. So back to me for 1 second, just while I figure out what I did wrong there. This is the problem when you have too many monitors set up. Okay. I think this time it will work. What do we reckon? Let's give it a go. All right. How about we do that again? Hello, everyone. I'm Pete. This is week 3. Going to be talking today about hiring a designer, and just wanted to do a quick shout out to the show schedule that you can see here. Let me make this a little bigger. See, I'm tempting fate here by trying out some different tricks. Okay, good. So, content marketing tips was last week. Hiring a designer is right now. And then next week, I'm excited to go into PowerPoint. So it's quite nerdy, but pretty much everyone that works at a business at some point in their life has to touch PowerPoint in one way or another. And I actually think it's a pretty powerful tool that when used correctly can produce a lot of amazing things. So let's now talk about hiring a designer. So there are lots of different ways to go about getting work done. I'm going to be talking specifically about my background, which is mostly B2B marketing, so creative services for B2B marketing teams. I've worked at other places, but that's where I've definitely had my focus in the last sort of 8 years. So when I was in-house, before starting Gosling Media, I was at a company called Media Math, and we had a in-house creative team. But we used to work with external vendors very frequently, whether direct freelancers or agencies. And whenever you're working with external vendors, and I've seen this as well because I'm on the other side of the fence now because I am the vendor, it can be really difficult, and there's a few common complaints that constantly come up. Projects always seem to take too long, or the communication isn't good enough, so the client has to constantly chase people. Pricing is a difficult one. It used to drive me crazy when I was the client working in-house, hiring a vendor. Say I wanted to get a video produced, and 4 or 5 emails go by before I even get an actual quote from them, so that I can decide whether or not I want to work with them. So that's incredibly frustrating when you can't get straight answers on pricing. And finally, particularly if your business is quite specific, so Media Math was a advertising technology platform. And if the freelancer or agency or whoever we were working with didn't fully understand the industry or the terminology or what it was we did, then the work pretty much always suffered, and we would have to redo a lot of the work in-house. So I think when I was putting Gosling Media together, I was trying to solve these problems, and the problems I sort of identified was finding and managing the right talent. Are you asking the right person to do the job, or are you sort of, you know, setting them up for failure by not giving them a chance? You've got to have the right person. You've got to have the right technology. Marketing these days is so enabled by tech that if you're not using the right software for the right job, then you're not going to get the best results. You have to make sure that out of the thousands of different software platforms, you're picking the right ones for the task that you're doing. And then finally, a lot of the time, the relationships we get kind of adversarial, or it's just the alignment between the vendor and the client isn't always clear, and it can get frustrating if the vendor has a different set of objectives really than you do as the client. Billing obviously is the obvious one, but there's other times as well where your needs aren't necessarily the same as the vendors, so there can be friction caused by that. So what are you supposed to do? I mean, there really are tons of options for finding designers or finding external vendors and freelancers in general. Number one, I'll start with is traditional agencies. Well-known brand names that are very, very high-end. You know, they will always do very good quality, and you can get amazing ideas from them, and the concepts will be strong. But on the negative side, they are expensive. They tend to, while they can be very good at the concepting and coming up with ideas, once you reach a certain scale, the business has to start like standardizing their solutions. If you're working with a much smaller, like an independent freelancer or a small agency, then they can be much more nimble and adapt. But if you're working with like a big traditional agency, they have a pretty firm process in how things work. Also, once an agency reaches a certain size, you have different teams set up. So you might have a team that works on a website that's separate to a team that works on branding. And then you have like these silos. So there's no like holistic view across them all. So agencies, from my experience, have been great for very limited, high impact projects, like a logo, branding design, or maybe an ad campaign. But for consistent use, they're too expensive, and honestly, that's not really what they're for. So the other end of the scale is freelancers. So freelancers are very easy to find. There's a lot of ways of sourcing them these days. I mean, everyone has a friend of a friend who downloaded a copy of Photoshop and can do some design work. But there's also lots of marketplaces online now, like Fiverr and Upwork, and you can find people overseas very affordably, so it's very cost effective. The problem though with going direct to freelancers is you'll spend a lot of your time communicating with them because they're a single person. Maybe they don't have the project management skills that you need or the industry expertise, but you'll spend a lot of time talking to that individual, also reviewing timesheets, managing their schedule. And then I can speak from a lot of experience that the really good freelancers, it's hard to keep them engaged. So they either take a job elsewhere, they're too busy with other clients. So you often have to have multiple freelancers as backups. So that's where staffing agencies come in. Staffing agencies basically have a roster of pre-vetted, good quality designers or developers or whatever you're looking for. And they can find you someone like tomorrow. You know, you call them up, explain what you need, and they'll find a pre-vetted good person quickly. The problem with staffing agencies, from when I've used them in the past, is they're great at sourcing the talent, but once that person is assigned to you and starts working with you, you're back in that freelancer bucket where you're working directly with the person. But you're paying like a 20+% premium because they source the talent for you. So it's good in a pinch, but it's not a great long-term solution. And then finally, the one that we're going to be really talking about today is in-house teams. So if your business is at a point where you feel building an in-house team makes sense, the benefits are that, you know, they'll understand your brand completely. They'll know they should know the industry that you're in and be able to do good work because of that. And access to them. So there's benefits to it. There's also the long-term commitment involved. So we'll go through after this a few of the ways that I think about it and how I break down different categories and whether hiring full-time designers makes sense. But building out a team is expensive, it's a long-term commitment, and then you're still limited to the skill set of the team. So in my past roles, when I had a team of 5 to 7 people, we still use freelancers and agencies because either there was too much work for the team to handle, or it's like a specific set of skills that we want to bring in. So pros and cons to all of these. The way that I break down working with or hiring full-time designers is 3 main buckets. The first bucket is scale. And believe it or not, I was trying to find a good conveyor belt image, and this is the I Love Lucy one. It's like so old, but it's still the best way of summarizing when the amount of work coming in becomes to get overloaded and then the quality suffers. So a big selling point of hiring internal designers is their ability to help with last-minute projects. But I know firsthand that this can really set a team up for failure, because the fact of the matter is that from the second that you hire this person, they're going to be instantly busy. And then when urgent requests come in, this sole designer that you've hired will drop everything and work on that urgent request. But then, like, what happens if 2 requests come in, right? That happens. But say that the one comes in and other projects can suffer. So you very quickly have a designer who's spending all of their time on just panic last minute issues, which enables the team to an extent to be less prepared. But it's also not good for the designer, right? They can only work on one thing at a time. So scale is tough. Also, you know, when a designer is hired in-house, it's normally sales and marketing people that are given the briefs to the designer or executives. And, you know, it really happens frequently that the designer kind of becomes just almost like an assistant or a tool that people are submitting requests to, or just going up and tapping them on the shoulder and saying, hey, we need to help with this. And designers, especially junior ones, if you're hiring like a sole junior designer, they're not going to say no. It's hard to push back. I've always had a hard time saying no, pushing back on requests. So quality will suffer because there should be a process for vetting the requests, making sure that the long-term objectives of the company are being met and that the designer isn't spending all their time on silly little quick jobs that really don't need a professional designer to be done. Also for scale, the time management is a big issue. So ideally you'll have someone helping the designer with the project management and time management, whether that's a marketing person or an admin of sorts. But there are many talented designers I've worked with, and I'm no different, where you can do amazing work, but it can take a long time to get things done. So time management, project management is so critical, especially to fast-paced marketing teams. And then if you're only hiring the one internal designer, you've got the holiday and sickness coverage to worry about. So what is the redundancy if that designer is out? So scaling is the theme there. The second one is capabilities. So hiring a designer in-house, they'll learn your brand intimately and they'll be really good at working with that brand. But they only work on that one brand. And like, so most of my career was in-house, where you are focused, you're the owner, the steward of that brand that you're working on. And there are times where you get to do very creative work for that brand, or there's like events or sub brands that get produced from it, where you get to, you know, flex your creative muscles a bit more. But as a whole, day in, day out, working on the same brand does tend to limit the breadth and depth of skills that this designer can develop. I talked a bit before about knowledge of the industry, especially in, you know, technology companies that very fast paced. You need to know what the product is and how it works and how it compares to competitors. It may sound like a designer doesn't need to know that, but their design work will be 1,000 times better if they understand thoroughly what it is that they're designing materials for. And, you know, it's hard for this sole designer to really gain that knowledge. It takes a very long time. I remember when I started at MediaMath, it took me a good 6 months or more to really sort of get up to speed with all of the terminology. And I came from advertising at a company called Blip. I was doing ads. So learning curve is a big, it's a big, not issue, but it's something to consider when hiring talent. Whereas if you're working with, say, an agency that is more specialized in that field, you don't have any delay. They can bring guidance from day one because they know the industry. So again, pros and cons, because the agencies can be expensive. Skill set can be limited, so even brilliant designers are better at some areas than others. So there's normally like a few buckets for designers, like user experience, user interface design, graphic design, product design. And there are very few people that can do all disciplines of design really well. And you got to be really clear about what it is that your company needs when you start looking to hire a designer, because not all designers are the same across all skill sets. Also, internal creatives can struggle to extract themselves from the brand that employs them. So you can lose perspective, especially when your boss is telling you to do things and you're, you know, doing the work ultimately to please your boss. You want to make sure that the brand standards and the company branding and everything is correct. But if it comes down to it, like I said before, it's hard to push back and say no. So internal creatives, yeah, definitely struggle to extract themselves from the brand and lose perspective that an external voice can bring, or external pair of eyes. So if you're working with a designer and they're losing their creativity, it's often because they're not being challenged enough. So if they're spending a lot of time working on PowerPoint presentations every day, they probably will burn out on that. So I always like to give designers a varied project base. So as often as possible, break up the tasks that the person is doing so they're not doing the same thing every single day, because they will get tired of that. And then the third piece is cost. So of course, cost for most companies is probably the deciding factor. So a starting salary for a junior designer in New York would be, you know, at least closer to $60,000. Rest of the country likely cheaper in certain areas, but you're looking at, you know, a significant salary from nothing before. If you're not replacing a designer, you're bringing in a designer for the first time. 50K is, you know, it's a decent amount of money. And then of course there's benefits. So full-time employees, they have benefits, right? So the company has to pay for those. I think 15% in additional cost on top of salary, once you've factored in like health insurance and their equipment and the office space and everything all in. I've heard that a good rule of thumb is to add 15% to base salary. Hiring costs can be high, even without a recruiter. So when you're committing to a full-time employee, it costs money to hire people. And there's also the opportunity cost. That's the time that you're spending looking for that right full-time employee. And the opportunity cost is basically you're spending time on a task that you're missing opportunities because you're not spending time on what you really should be doing. So there's a substantial opportunity cost, and that's something you really don't have to worry about with external support like agencies. Scalability. So I mentioned scale earlier, but when it comes to cost as well, if you're working with an external agency, it's much more cost effective for them to scale than it is for you. So if you have a full-time designer on staff and you need to scale up your capabilities, then it's going to cost a lot of money. If you're working with an agency and work goes up, it's just like an incremental cost. It's not going to change the budget a huge amount. They can absorb the work much better. And also flexibility. So, you know, creative requirements are seldom constant. So you'll have to expand or shrink resources as necessary. There's times of the year where the designer or marketing is really busy. Maybe the run up to holidays and Christmas and New Year's is super busy, and then it gets quieter in January and February. So there's like peaks and troughs to workload normally. So you have to think about how your internal team can accommodate that. And with a full-time salary, you know, regardless of how much work they have, you're paying them full-time. So if there is a down period where you don't need as much, then you're paying either way. So I just want to say I'm not against in-house designers in the least. It's just a lot of the things I'm talking about here are things that people don't necessarily think about. And it's very natural for a marketing team to get to a certain size where they're like, okay, we need an in-house designer full-time in the office that we can sit down with and work with. But it seldom is that simple. So I started Gosling Media very much focused on solving this problem, like the problem of why is it so difficult to work with external vendors. So choosing B2B technology companies as our focus, the model that we've developed is squarely focused at solving these main pain points that I've just been talking about. So the way that I look at it is most companies, there's something, I'm calling it unblock obstacles, but there's something that is limiting them getting work done. So maybe the marketing team, one of the people on the marketing team does events and one person does revenue marketing, and the design team is focused on doing a big event booth design or video for a booth or something that's taking up their time. The other marketing people aren't getting their assets produced, or maybe the CMO knows they want to produce this type of creative, but they don't have the capabilities in-house. Excuse me. So Unblock Obstacles is all about figuring out what it is that's really the pain point in the organization. What is causing the problems? Why are things taking too long? What's not getting done? And then building a solution around that. So we know what works. I mean, we've been doing this a long time. So chances are that whatever problem the company is seeing, we've seen it before, and we can provide a recommendation for a solution to fix that. The next step, once you've figured out where resources should be allocated, is execution. So again, in-house design teams, agencies, freelancers, the pros and cons I was talking about before, there's good and bad to all of them. On the execution side, we've consciously been trying to just cherry pick what makes agencies good, what makes freelancers good, what makes staffing agencies good, and build a solution that takes all of the good and reduces the bad. And partnering for long-term success. Another thing I didn't mention about agencies is they tend to be very focused on like a single outcome, whether it's launching a new brand, building a website, or making a video or something. Once the website is designed and launched, the agency usually disappears. But for the in-house marketing team, that tends to be when the work really begins. So we're very focused on doing like long-term partnerships with clients and getting like in the weeds, in the trenches with the marketing team to help them actually get their stuff done. And all of this, the whole reason the marketing team is there is to grow the business. So creative teams aren't always thinking about revenue. I mean, good creative teams understand the business side of it too. But it's often something that, their class as a cost center, right? Rather than a revenue driver. So we want to always be thinking about growth and what is it that we're doing to help grow the business? Is this the right material or asset or problem? Are you trying to solve the right problem really to help grow your business? So there's the sort of 3 main buckets for our solution. Anyone that's worked with marketing or sales and creative teams will know that the trickiest part is really just the process. You can have a great idea, but getting it executed and live can fall apart in many different ways. So we broke down the creative request process into quite granular detail, and we've built a custom platform around it to enable the process to be as efficient as possible. So kind of similar to IT support desk or something like that, where you submit a ticket. A lot of in-house teams will have some kind of ticketing system where the marketing person or salesperson submits what they need, goes into the system, and then the job begins. So we have a custom dashboard that we give to all clients. The marketing person submits the request through the dashboard, which triggers an alert to an account manager on our side, who reviews the brief and makes sure that it's clear and that all of the required assets and text and materials are supplied so that the designer can get started right away. If you're working with like a sole freelance designer or a big agency, not so much on the agency side, but when you're working with a designer directly, they don't have that buffer in between you and them. Having an account manager or project manager in between to make sure that everything is correct drastically reduces the amount of time it takes to produce the work. Because so often when I was doing freelance, the client would send me some work. I would take a quick look at it. Yeah, it looks fine. Maybe a day later, I actually get to working on the project. I realize that, oh, I don't have the right image, or I don't have the right font, or this copy is missing. So then you have to go back to the client and ask them. So having a person in the middle whose sole purpose is making sure that everything is ready to go makes a massive difference. So then we have a core in-house team that handle most of the projects, but we also bring in external resources as needed. So over the last 15 years, I've built up a really strong network of contractors, specialist contractors. So another benefit that we bring to clients is that if there's a certain skill set that you're struggling to find, chances are I know someone from my previous experience who can do that. So one example was we were working with a company who wanted to create these 3D renderings for their artwork, for their brand materials. So I have a contact in London. His name's Radim. He's amazing. Brand new, brandnu.co.uk. He's a phenomenal artist. So he's a perfect example of where our internal team handles all of the work, but we brought in a specialist for that one key component. And the same goes for technology. We often support clients with the tech as well. So if they want to do a certain campaign, maybe it's a new company and they don't have their marketing automation set up, they don't have software for it, we will use our white labeled technology to send the email campaign on their behalf. There's lots of ways that we can help facilitate the marketing execution as well as the creative. Another big pain point in the process is the feedback and approvals process. A project could take a designer 5 hours to do, but then it takes another 2 weeks before it's approved and finished. So we very consciously focus a lot of our time in designing this platform on the whole feedback and approval process to remove as much friction and back and forth as possible. So we have a proofing tool where the client can comment directly on the asset. The designer gets notified straight away, as well as the project manager. So the project manager and the designer get notified on any edits. They can make the changes quickly, re-upload the asset, and the client gets notified there's a new version. So the email backwards and forwards is completely gone. And trying to decipher, if you've ever given feedback on a piece of like a web page or a print ad or something, it's difficult to write out in a paragraph, move this copy from here to here. And it's even harder for the designer to understand what the heck you're asking them to do. So having a visual tool that lets you mark up the changes directly makes it seamless for both sides, and it's made a massive difference. And then the custom dashboard, finally, another challenge is, say in 6 months time, the ebook that you put together, you want to make a version in a different language for APAC or something, and you can't find the source files. So source file management in general, we have an automated system that generates the folder structure as the requests come in. So the client can access all of the source files for any project in the future and always know where they are. So that's another big advantage of working with a company that's specifically designed for these types of tasks. And you want a vendor that can cover a lot of capabilities. So if you're hiring in-house, as I mentioned before, or hiring independent freelancers, if someone says they can do everything perfect, then that's a red flag. I enjoy working across different types of mediums, but I know for certain which ones are my strengths and which ones aren't. But when you have a team and a system and a setup that we have that is specifically designed for handling requests for marketing people, we can handle pretty much everything that a marketing team would need. So from branding and copywriting to video production and animation, there's a whole host of product types that we deliver through the platform. So that did turn into a bit of a sales pitch, which I didn't mean to, but the takeaway is, if you're thinking of hiring a designer, my very strong, somewhat educated after 15 years of doing this opinion is that unless you're building a full in-house creative agency that's going to service the whole company and act as an in-house agency, I really wouldn't recommend hiring just an individual full-time designer. Because of all the reasons I said before, you're much better off working with a vendor like Gosling Media, who can handle the scale, the complexity, and for a much more efficient cost than bringing in full-time people. So I'm going to end it there. This was 34 minutes. The last couple, I talked for an hour, and I think it was too long. So next week, we're going to be talking about PowerPoint work. And if you don't use PowerPoint, it still could be interesting for you to watch, because you might want to say, if you want to make a video or you want to make some flyers or a banner ad or something, like, you may not think of PowerPoint as being software to use, to go to. But honestly, you can literally produce anything in PowerPoint. You can edit audio, you can edit video, you can do motion graphics, but you can do print as well. So if you're doing letter paper sized or A4 paper for print, you can do that in PowerPoint too. It is pretty amazing. So definitely take a look at goslingmedia.com/live. You can see previous recorded episodes on there. And I'm planning on cutting up these long-winded rambles into bite-sized little pieces that are much more watchable. And hit me up on LinkedIn. If you're seeing this and want to connect, then my LinkedIn address is here, and I'd love to hear from you. But that is it. I'm going to end it now.